First, invocation song by Yamini Ramesh.
Bhavaye Shri Bhashakaram Bhavaye Shri Bhashakaram Kamaye Yatindra Padabjam Bhavaye Shri Bhashakaram Bhashakaram Bhutapurisha Bhuvana Vichata Bhutapurisha Bhuvana Vichata Bhutadaya Param Guruvaram Manadam Bhutadaya Param Guruvaram Manadam Bhavaye Shri Bhashakaram Shruti Parimalasara Bhashya Deepakam Shruti Parimalasara Bhashya Deepakam Shripati Pujana Nityanidharakam Shruti Parimalasara Bhashya Deepakam Shripati Pujana Nityanidharakam Sharanagati Rasa Palana Chaturno Sharanagati Rasa Palana Chaturno Sarati Bhashana Bodhana Dhiram Vidvajjananuta Vimala Prabhavam Varada Padayugada Madhupa Munindram Paramamrita Karunarasa Bharitam Pavana Charitam Jagadacharyam Bhavaye Shri Bhashakaram Kamaye Yatindra Padabjam Bhavaye Shri Bhashakaram Bhashakaram. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, madam. Thank you very much for the wonderful song. Now, dear friends and scholars, I take this opportunity to welcome you all to this unique lecture by a Christian minister in a Vaishnavite meet. In Christian parlance, a minister is one authorized by a church to perform functions such as teaching of religious beliefs and leading services like weddings, baptism, and the like. And such a man of faith is talking about Ramanuja, not only talking, but also openly declaring that Ramanuja is his Acharya. So we are very glad we have now Mr. Jon with us. This shows vividly that Ramanuja is of 12th century, but for 23rd century too. His philosophies are universal and is even now relevant to the world. He was a peerless thinker and a dedicated social reformer, we know. His Visishtatveda is not only a mere religious philosophy, but an exposition to the social justice. The characteristic of a Sri Vaishnava, as pronounced by the greatest Acharya Ramanuja himself, is anyone can see for himself whether he is a real Vaishnava or not. If upon seeing the misery and adversity of fellow human being, his pity is excited, and if he says, alas, he deserves to be called a Vaishnava. This was Ramanuja's stand on his perseverance to humanness, and which is attached to all, making his thoughts universal. Now coming to talk about our speaker is a very, very simple man. Jon Paul Sydnor is a professor of theology and religious studies at Emmanuel College, Boston. Jon Paul is an academic theologian and a Christian minister who thinks in partnership with all religions. Currently, he is writing a systematic theology based on agapic non-dualism, the belief that God's sustaining love unites the diverse cosmos into one harmonious whole. His primary conversation partners are Hindu theologian Ramanuja and the Buddhist philosopher Nagarjuna. When not teaching or writing, Jon Paul serves as theologian in residence at Grace Community Boston, an all-inclusive Christian gathering pastored by his wife. His wife is also a pastor, Reverend Abby Henrich. Jon Paul studied at the University of Virginia, Princeton Theological Seminary, and Boston College, where he earned his PhD. He also served in the Peace Corps in Poland. He has 3 children, and he himself has claimed 3 children and 3 dogs. This shows how human he is. When not thinking about God, Jon Paul likes to play soccer, chess, and piano, all which great mediocrity. This is what he has given to me as his bio. Now, I request Dayanadi to inaugurate, which will be followed by Dr. VKS and Raghavan's a brief summary about the entire thing. Then we will go to the speaker, Mr. Paul. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Pranamam Lakshmana Muni Pratigrinnahatu Mamakam Prasadhayati Yat Sukti Swadhina Patikam Shrutim. Swami Vedanta Deshiga says in Yatiraja Saptati. I think the topic itself very unique. Why do I consider Ramanuja as Acharya? This question arises so many people in India also. How can we consider Ramanuja as Acharya? But and straight or hidden, so many leaders accepted that Ramanuja considered as Acharya. And Swami Vedanta Deshiga himself says the answer in Shloka, why Ramanuja might be the Acharya for the world. Pratisthapita Acharya. Shamitodaya Shankaradi Garvaha Swabalad Udhrita Yadava Prakashaha Avaropitan Sutera Parthan Nanu Ramanujaha Sayesha Bhuyaha. This shloka is mentioned by Swami Vedanta Deshiga in Yatiraja Saptati. Sayeva Rajaha, Yatirajaha is the foremost pontiff for all sannyasi in Vaishnava Vishishtadvaita philosophy, because he is defended Shamayodita Shankaradi Garvaha and given the hand and crushed Swabala Budhrita Yadava Prakasha Matam, and he is given a straight way of understanding the Upanishad by Ghataka Shruti, because the all 3 religion like Shankara philosophy, Yadava Prakasha, they are interpreted the Upanishad scriptures in his own way. But Ramanuja, given the Ghataka Shruti, Avaropitan Shrutera Parthan, is giving a straight way to Upanishad, how to understand the Upanishad beginning to end. So I think the topic is consider the Ramanuja is Acharya for all. So I think Professor Jon Paul has given a wonderful topic, how influenced by Ramanuja. So this is my word to the elite audience, giving an opportunity to the in this lecture. I thank Dr. T.K. Parsar, the Secretary of Alumni Association, and other alumni. Thank you, sir.
Sir, Raghavan sir, இப்ப பேசுறாங்களா கமெண்ட்ரி முடிஞ்ச அப்புறம் பேசுறாங்களா லெக்சர் முடிஞ்ச அப்புறம் கமெண்ட்ஸ் உங்களுக்கு
இப்பயே பேசுறேன்.
ஓகே
ஆடி ஸ்ரீமதே ஸ்ரீ லக்ஷ்மீ நரசிம்ம பரபிரம்மணே நமஹ. ஞானானந்தமயம் தேவம் நிர்மல ஸ்பட்டிகாகிருதிம் ஆதாரம் சர்வ வித்யானாம் ஹயக்ரீவம் உபாஸ்மஹே. யோ நித்யம் அச்சுத பதாம்புஜ யுக்ம ருக்ம व्यामोहतस्ततितराणि तृणाय मेने अस्मद्गुरोर् भगवतोस्य दयैक सिन्धोः रामानुजस्य चरणौ शरणं प्रपद्ये. Followers of Ramanuja all accept that Ramanuja's school of thought is the correct way of interpretation to the Upanishadic principles. Vedanta Deshika refers to Nathamuni, Alavandara, Ramanacharya, and Ramanuja are the three important preceptors of Ishtadvaita. Vedanta Deshika says, Nathena Muninathena Bhaveyam Nathavanagam Yasya Naigamikam Tattam Hastamalagatam Gatam. In another verse he says, Nathopajñam Pravrittam Bahubhirupachitam Yamuneya Prabandhaihi Tratam Samyak Yatindraihi Idam Akilatamah Karsanam Darsanam Naha. The system of thought, Vishishtadvaita, is Nathopajñam Pravrittam, has been put in correct foundation by his treatises, that is Nathamuni treatises Nyaya Tattva and Yoga Rahasya. Then Alavandara Ramanacharya made that foundation stronger by his 8 works. So Alavandar Yamuneya Prabandhaihi Nathopajñam Pravrittam Bahubhir Upachitam Yamuneya Prabandhaihi. Then Ramanuja was able to construct the palatial mansion of Ishtadvaita by his scholarly treatises, namely Sri Bhashya, Gita Bhashya, and others. So these 3 authors are preceptors are very important in Vishishtadvaita's system of thought. Ramanuja is the Acharya who has used the Ghataka Shruti to make a synthesis of both Veda Shruti and Abheda Shruti found in the Upanishads. In this way, Ramanuja has explained the doctrines of Vishishtadvaita in his treatises. Quoting one Mangala Shloka of Vedanta Sara, I will complete my introductory remarks. The Vedanta Sara invocatory Shloka runs like this. Samasta Chidajitvastu Sariraya Akilatmane Srimate Nirmalanando Dhanvate Vishnave Namaha. Ramanuja pays his salutations to Lord Vishnu. He gives the adjectives in this manner. Samasta Chidajitvastu Sariraya Akilatmane. Lord Vishnu is the supreme being who has all other beings, both Chetana and Achetana, as his Sarira. And he is full of all auspicious qualities, of course, bereft of all blemishes. Srimate, he is always found to be along with Goddess Lakshmi. Srimate Nirmalanando Dhanvate, he is full of all auspicious excellences. To that Lord Vishnu, I pay my homage. Like that he says in the invocatory shloka of the Vedanta Sara. Anyhow, Ramanujacharya has put the Vaishnava system of thought as the main purport of all the scriptures, especially Upanishadic Vedanta literature. I suppose Professor John will explain his thought about Ramanuja, establishing how Ramanuja is called as Acharya. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Now I request Dr. John to make his speech. Thank you, sir.
Thank you all for having me. My voice is going to be a little bit scratchy. I've got a cold. We got like 3 different respiratory viruses going around Boston right now, so I may cough on occasion and my voice might be a little scratchy, so I apologize for that ahead of time. I'd like to thank you all for inviting me here. I studied Ramanuja in depth when I was writing my dissertation to get my PhD at Boston College, but my studies of Ramanuja were almost exclusively textual. I just read his writings and the Upanishads and the Gita and his commentaries, etc. So I really did not have any encounter with Sri Vaishnavas at the time. So it's nice for me to take the textual knowledge and actually get to converse with Sri Vaishnavas about that. So thank you very much for this opportunity. I have a slideshow that I'm going to share with you. As I go through the slideshow, I'm going to abbreviate it a little bit, be a little bit too long, but I kind of want to give a preamble to the slideshow before I start presenting it. And this is the preamble. We in the Western Christian tradition, the dominant form, the dominant concept of God could be called, in our tradition, it's called either classical theism, theism being belief in God, or sometimes it's called dualistic theism, dualistic meaning two-ish theism, if you wish. And this dominant form of theology draws a strict distinction between the creator and the creation. In other words, God is of a different substance from the creation, and therefore God cannot be within matter or within people. So there's kind of a dividing line drawn between God and what we experience in our everyday lives. I personally have not experienced that distinction in my own life. I have experienced God as pervading the cosmos and pervading the people that I love, and being not just beyond the cosmos, but also within, not just beyond the people, all human beings, but also within all human beings. So I'm largely in disagreement with the weight of the Christian tradition about God's separation, distinction from creation. And basically what I'm trying to do is utilize Ramanuja to reconstruct Christian theology, to acknowledge the presence of God within creation and within persons, as opposed to being utterly distinct from creation and from within persons. So I'm making arguments and writing articles and making presentations, and I'm writing a book that's basically making that argument. So let me run through the argument that I'm going to make with you. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see, I'm going to share this view slideshow. All right, can y'all see that now? Can you see my screen?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So I actually think that there are multiple legitimate religious experiences that people have that classical theism or dualistic theism exclude, that Ramanuja's divine ontology actually includes. And for that reason, I'm using Ramanuja's divine ontology to account for those experiences within the Christian tradition. So here's one experience. This is by a person named John Muir. And John Muir is a great American naturalist, and he wrote about nature, and he experienced God in nature. And he actually convinced our president, Teddy Roosevelt, to establish the world's first national park at Yosemite National Park, which is outside of San Francisco. And John Muir writes, when he was in nature and describing it, he writes, long blue, spiky edged shadows crept across the snow fields, while a rosy glow, at first scarce discernible, gradually deepened and suffused every mountaintop, flushing the glaciers and the harsh crags above them. This was the alpenglow, to me the most impressive of all the terrestrial manifestations of God. At the touch of this divine light, the mountains seemed to kindle to a rapt religious consciousness and stood hushed like devout worshipers waiting to be blessed. So very powerful and clear experience of God in nature, which most Christian theologians would reject because the creator cannot be in the creation. I personally believe that God is too big to fit inside any one religion. So I'm very comfortable looking outside of my tradition for an explanation of John Muir's religious experience. And I do that in the confidence that when we seek what is truest in our own tradition, we discover that we are one with those who seek what is truest in their tradition. So I feel very comfortable in this exploration. And I skip, that's a long slide. So I'm going to just consider the possibility that Ramanuja was right, which I think Ramanuja was right, is right, and that we can learn from Ramanuja for that purpose. So there are multiple religious experiences that a person can have. I'm going to focus on 4 of these. People experience a personal God. People experience a divine presence in humankind. People experience a divine presence in the material cosmos. People experience the divine summons to ethical conduct, which TK read to us before this presentation began. And people experience the divine presence in the rational order of the universe. And I think that now a lot of people get into these things. For example, classical theism or dualistic theism, they have a very strong sense of a personal God, and then they exclude that personal God from a presence in humankind or in the cosmos. So other people, for example, they're called pantheists, nature worshipers. They experience God in nature, but they don't experience a personal God. So it's exclusive. Some people are religious humanists. They experience God in humankind, but they don't experience a personal God. So, and a lot of these can be interpreted exclusively. Some, humanists are opposed to religion, for example. My argument is that these experiences are all compatible and harmonic, and that Ramanuja's theology harmonizes them. So since Ramanuja's theology harmonizes them, we can all get along. People who worship a personal God, people who experience the divine presence in the cosmos, people experience divine presence in other humans. everybody's having a legitimate religious experience, just with a different emphasis, and that's fine. So, religious experience one, God is a transcendent relational person. This is the personal God of whom Ramanuja wrote. It's very much plays a key role in the Jewish and Christian traditions. This is the God of Moses in the Exodus, who led the Israelites out of Egypt, for example. This is a gracious God. The religions tend to agree that this God is very gracious, concerned. Doesn't mean life will be easy, but it means that God will be present with us in the difficulties of life. And we also can experience this God as the maker of the universe, the sustainer of the universe. So there's some excellent poetry in the Hebrew Bible, the Jewish scriptures. When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you have established, what are human beings that you are mindful of us, mortals that you care for us? Yet you have made us a little lower than divine and crowned us with glory and honor. So in other words, you might consider the expanse of the cosmos and feel small. But this text, and Ramanuja would certainly agree, reassures us that we are immensely significant within the cosmos because we are immensely significant to God. So now some people will insist on God's transcendence, but reject the immanence of God. Those insist that God is beyond, but deny that God is within. In the Christian tradition, this has a lot to do with our understanding of Jesus Christ being the Son of God, which is a very complicated history of Christology, how we interpret Christ. I find that tradition somewhat problematic, and I'm trying to rework it. So this is an example of classical theism. This is just an example of someone excluding God from residence within the cosmos. This is the most influential theologian in the Western tradition. So he writes, in the beginning, that is from yourself, in your wisdom, which is begotten of your substance, you made something and made it out of nothing. For you made heaven and earth not out of your own self. So it's not emanationist. It's not coming from God. Or it would be equal to your only begotten Son, and therefore to yourself. If creation were made out of you, it would be just like Christ. It has to be different from Christ, so it's got to be distinct from you. It cannot possibly be right for anything which is not of you to be equal to you. Let's see, go here. There you go. So theism, we have on the left, with God creating the universe and being separate from the universe. Panentheism, the universe is within God. God pervades the universe, but God at the same time exceeds the universe. Ramanuja is very much working with a panentheistic view, as am I, as someone who considers Ramanuja my Acharya. So here's another religious experience. God is experienced in self and neighbor. So this is Quaker theologian. The Lord showed me so that I did see clearly that he did not dwell in these temples which men had commanded and set up, but in people's hearts. His people were his temple, and he dwelt in them. There's that of God in every man. That's George Fox, the founder of the Christian tradition of Quakerism. Or to see another person is to see the face of God. It's Victor Hugo. Every man is a divinity in disguise, a God playing the fool, Ralph Waldo Emerson. So I'm just going to this is We can't see God in anyone until we see God in everyone, St. Catherine Labouré. So there's a lot of these experiences, but they tend to be suspect in the Christian tradition. So what I'm advocating and what I believe Ramanuja advocates is theistic egalitarianism, a belief in the equality of all people due to our mutual sustenance, creation and sustenance by God. So that's Hindu priest C.S. Rangarajan carrying Dalit devotee Aditya Parasari on his shoulders. Together they entered Sri Ranganatha temple at Jayagada, where Parasari offered prayers. So this is an egalitarian act. Brahmin praying with a Dalit, Brahmin carrying a Dalit on his shoulders. And this to me is a powerful expression of the egalitarian nature of God, of Sri Vaishnavism, and ultimately of religion itself. So this type of egalitarianism can be very warm and healing. It commends, since we are divinity relating to divinity, it commends an interdivine human ethics. The human to the human is as God to God in this view, and we can see one another as expressions of God in the world. And to me, that resonates deeply with my Christian faith, because Jesus also practiced this in a profound way. He was the includer of the excluded. He included women. In his ministry, he included women, lepers. He included tax collectors. He included prostitutes, etc. So he saw God in everyone and treated them as such in a radical manner and in a dangerous manner. Dangerous until he was actually crucified. So now, if you take this kind of theistic egalitarianism or this kind of humanist interpretation too far, it can become idolatrous. In other words, if it's not tempered, if we worship the human purely as human and do not have that worship tempered by a belief in the actual God, then it can get become dangerously out of control. So, for example, in the case of Hitler, that was an entire society centered on one man, unchecked by its religion, calling him the Führer, the leader, and without regard to any higher values. So, and that of course brought horrible destruction upon Germany, as idolatrous practice generally will. Then there's religious experience 3. God is experiencing the summons to ethical conduct, which we've talked a little bit about. It's very prominent in the Christian tradition. I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. Gandhi said that poverty is the worst form of violence. So this is my church quoted the Bhagavad Gita in one of our posts. Strive constantly to serve the welfare of the world by devotion to selfless work. One attains the supreme goal of life. Do your work with the welfare of others always in mind. Gita 3.19. So ethical conduct is extremely important, but it can be, if you're not careful, it can become rigoristic legalism. In other words, kind of an obsessive compulsive attention to what you're doing and following the rules. And this kind of obsessive compulsive attentiveness can become hollow with regard to compassion or love, etc. So, and in legalism, there's a kind of an emphasis on personal virtue with little concern for social welfare. It's a judgmental attitude towards self and others, anxiety about your ethical performance instead of joy in received grace. And there's a lack of compassion toward human foibles, mistakes that people make, which can tend to make the legalist more kind of merciless and unforgiving. So we need more than that. So Ramanuja Tagore wrote, I slept and dreamt that life was joy. I awoke and saw that life was service. I acted and behold, service was joy. So that is a description of ethical conduct. And I believe Ramanuja would agree with that statement. So religious experience 4, God is experienced in the material universe. The Holy Land is everywhere. In other words, we don't have to go somewhere to be in the Holy Land. The entire material universe is the body of God. Therefore, and God is the soul of the material universe. Therefore, the Holy Land is everywhere. So, and that's why we experience so much beauty in the universe, because God, Ramanuja explicitly describes God as beautiful. So of course, if the universe is the body of God, then it is going to be beautiful. So there's no synonym for God so perfect as beauty, whether as seen carving the lines of the mountains within glaciers, or gathering matter into stars, or planning the movements of water, or gardening. Still all is beauty. John Muir again. So the problem is, if we take this with an either or stance rather than a both and stance, then we can become pantheists. So if you experience God in nature, there's a certain fear of pantheism. Pantheism is asserting that God is nature and nature is God, and God is no more than nature. So pantheism draws an exhaustive identity between God and the material cosmos, so that God becomes purely immanent and in no way transcendent. God is within the universe, but not beyond. And people practice this. People say, nature is my religion, the earth is my temple. So, and then you have people denying, for example, that God is the soul of the universe. So Aquinas writes, thus then is removed the error of the Gentiles who said that God is the soul of the heavens, or even the soul of the whole world. Because thereby they defended the error of idolatry by saying that the whole world was God, not by reason of the body, but by reason of the soul. Just as man is said to be wise, not by reason of the body, but by reason of the soul. In the base of this error, the Gentiles thought it to follow that, not unfittingly, divine worship should be shown to the world and its parts. So Aquinas, who's the most influential theologian in the Catholic tradition, is basically saying that if you believe God to be in the universe, you will worship the universe instead of God. So you can't do that. There are more cautions against that. 5, I'll go through this real quickly, but we can also experience God within the mathematical character of the universe, the mathematical physics that describes the universe. So we experience that as the mind of God. Some scientists actually believe, this is Stephen Hawking writing, God is the name people give to the reason we are here, but I think the reason is the laws of physics rather than someone with whom we can have a personal relationship. So he's saying, it is the laws of physics themselves, not a personal God, that causes our existence. Max Tegmark says something similar. So I'm going to skip this ritual thing right here. So in conclusion, or just conclude, humans can experience the sacred in many different ways. Unfortunately, approaching these experiences with a binary either or logic forces a choice between them or distorts their true nature. If we apply the law of non-contradiction to religious experience, if we approach religious experience with an either or dichotomy, then we end up with a string of competing exclusivisms rather than a God-saturated universe. Fortunately, a better interpretation of the varieties of religious experience is possible. So I'm going to make the case for a non-dual epistemology, a non-dual way of knowing, in other words, both and rather than either or, utilizing Ramanuja. And I think this is very much the choice that Ramanuja made, both and. He was confronted with Tamil and Sanskrit, the Alvars and the Vedas, Prakriti or Purusha, body or soul, and then he just said both and. He valued Tamil and Sanskrit, the Alvars and the Vedas, Prakriti and Purusha, the body and the soul. So he's celebrating both. So my thesis is that Ramanuja's trimodal, monosubstantial divine ontology provides us with a means by which to reconcile our varieties of religious experience as sourced to one God. So Narayana is first and foremost an embodied personal being with a beautiful divine form. This form of Narayana explains our experience of the sacred as a transcendent, personal, relational God. So we've got the personal God. We have a personal God, and Narayana is superabundant, so Narayana's nature is to overflow. And Narayana emanates jivas, us, and we are of one substance with Narayana, but we are of a different mode from Narayana. So we experience the sacred as present in self and other, and we experience in the sacred in the divine summons to care for one another. And Narayana also emanates Prakriti, which is of the same substance but of a different mode from Narayana and the jivas. So now we have the personal God Narayana, God who is within the jivas and also within Prakriti, the psychophysical complex within which we live. So we experience the sacred in all that is natural, physical, and psychological, and we experience the sacred in all that is natural, physical, and psychological. And I'm going to skip some of these right here. We experience God in the divine summons to care for the environment, and we can experience the sacred in the rational order of the universe, what Max Tegmark and Stephen Hawking were talking about, the laws of physics. And I make this argument because we are living within, according to Ramanuja and according to Vaishnavism, we are living within the mind of Vishnu. Because we're living within the dream of Vishnu, which is the mind of Vishnu, we are experiencing the intelligence of Vishnu within the universe. And that's why Stephen Hawking and Einstein and Max Tegmark are experiencing the natural universe as divine, even though they did not believe in a personal God. So we can experience the sacred in the performance of God-directed ritual. So Ramanuja's monosubstantial, one substance, trimodal, one substance in three forms, Narayana, jivas, and Prakriti. Ramanuja's monosubstantial, trimodal divine ontology allows us to live in a God-saturated universe that legitimates and contextualizes all forms of religious experience. And through this view, God wants us to be totally alive. God can allow us to be totally alive. Everything that comes from God is life-giving, which I believe. So, moreover, Ramanuja's non-dual epistemology allows us to conceptualize God without delimiting God's power. Narayana is located and omnipresent. Narayana is temporal, of time and eternal. Narayana is embodied and infinite. Narayana is transcendent and immanent. Narayana is personal and impersonal. So Ramanuja's divine ontology celebrates difference as a gift from God, as a divine gift Difference does not exist to divide us. Instead, difference exists to be united by us through worship and service to God. So Ramanuja's theology later can be called Vishisht Advaita, or qualified non-dualism. It declares the absolute fundamental unity of all difference in God. Difference is real and unity is real. And as a Christian, I subscribe to the monosubstantial trimodal divine ontology of Ramanuja, coupled with his non-dual, unitive, unifying epistemology, his way of knowing, how he interprets the world. I believe that reality is beta beta, similar and different, grounded in God, yet distinguishable from God. While continuing to accept the doctrine of divine creation, I reject the traditional Christian doctrine of creatio ex nihilo as failing to explain the pervasive experience of God in self, neighbor, and nature. Creatio ex nihilo meaning creation from nothingness, not creation from God's own being, but from nothingness itself. So as a subscriber to the divine ontology of Ramanuja, I could be called a Vishisht Advaita Christian insofar as I accept the reality of ontological difference and celebrate that difference, yet always work to reveal the fundamental unity of all in God. Thank you for your time and attention. Jon Paul Sydnor, PhD. That's it. Now we have time for Q&A.
Thank you, Mr. John, for the Visishtadvaita Christian. Thank you. Now it's a question and answer session. The session is open to all. Anybody can ask questions. And he was very particular about that session. So you can ask now. Be brief, please.
What I mean, if I can ask you a very basic question, what fascinated you to start looking at Ramanuja? I mean, is it your quest for something non-dual ontology, epistemology, or are you looked at Ramanuja and then his philosophy fascinated you? Which came first?
No, it was Ramanuja first. Very much so. And I was really assigned Ramanuja by my PhD director, who was Francis X. Clooney, who's now at Harvard. He was at Boston College at the time. He's now at Harvard. So I went to Boston College to study with him. He was studying Ramanuja. I studied Ramanuja with him. And I would say, I wrote my dissertation comparing Christian theologian Friedrich Schleiermacher with Ramanuja. And I made intellectual sense of it when I was writing my dissertation. But I would say I didn't quite, I don't know what the word is, imbibe Ramanuja or come to see Ramanuja as my Acharya or adopt Ramanuja's worldview. And about 10 years later, I think it took that long for it to kind of sit with me and gel and come to make sense. And then I realized that through Ramanuja, I mean, the universe could be richer than it could have been in a classical or dualistic theology. And then I just wanted more Christians to subscribe to Ramanuja's ontology, which is what I'm doing right now academically.
And you said you're doing this more academically than otherwise, right? I mean, is it acceptable, or are they more takers to that philosophy outside as well?
Oh, absolutely. I actually think more Christians have a non-dual theism than a dualistic theism. I think people are very open to experiencing God in neighbor and God in nature. And I think that they have these experiences, and then sometimes a classically trained Christian pastor or leader will say, well, that's not legitimate. God's not in nature. God created nature, but is distinct from nature. And that's a problem, because then you're basically telling somebody that their religious experience wasn't right, and that stifles our religious growth. So I'm trying to write academic articles, but I'm also trying to penetrate the popular sphere and make these more acceptable to people in the popular spheres. Well, that's why in my presentation, you saw a whole bunch of memes with Grace Community Boston on them. Those memes, and they were advocating, for example, John Muir's experience of God in nature. So I'm putting those up on Facebook and Instagram and places like that to spread this theology outside of academia and in the popular sphere.
Sir, you're muted, sir. Sir, Jagannivas, sir, you're muted. Jagannivas, sir, you're speaking, but you're muted.
Yes,
There you go.
right. Professor, I have a small and maybe a very peculiar question. Today, there was an announcement about the Nobel Prize winners of physics who discussed quantum mechanics, and the takeaway from that philosophy or that thought is that nothing is real. Everything is unreal. It is from the observer's point of view, like it comes out, but otherwise it's all unreal. Whereas Ramanuja believed that everything is real, including the dream is real. He says what you see in the dream is also real. So this thought of today's mechanics, quantum mechanics, is it contrary to the thought of Sri Ramanuja, or are they just sticking to Advaita philosophy of Sri Shankara? I don't know, but I'm a bit confused on that, sir. Could you throw some thoughts on that?
Okay, so I had a little bit of, you broke up a little bit, and I had a little bit of internet trouble here. So let me make sure I got your question right. That the quantum mechanics Nobel Prize in Physics was recently awarded for to quantum physicists who basically study quantum entanglement, spooky action at a distance, and they are basically arguing that the world that we see is unreal, whereas Ramanuja asserted that it is real. And therefore, can I comment on that? Was that your question?
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. So I do have an interest, a layman's interest in quantum mechanics and physics and cosmology, etc. It's just something that if you're going to be a theologian these days, you have to know. So, and I think when they say it's unreal, they might be saying the appearance is unreal. For example, the appearance of solidity is unreal. The appearance of things being nouns rather than verbs is unreal, because matter is basically energy. All right. So for example, the quarks, the three quarks inside a proton or a neutron, they're bouncing around inside there at the speed of light. And that is that energy that gives it weight. Okay. So I would agree with them when they say that appearances can be deceiving, but I would disagree with anyone who says that it's all an illusion. And I believe that it's important for us to acknowledge that appearances can be deceiving. Ramanuja very much emphasized this, because people would turn their attention from Narayana and to the material world. And they would say, well, when the body dies, we die. We are worth however much money we have. We are worth however big our house is. And Ramanuja is saying that's what causes our suffering. We need to turn our attention, not turn our backs on the material world, but only understand the material world through our knowledge and worship of Narayana. Okay, so there's an appearance that we need to break through to get to reality. Physics, I believe, is breaking through an appearance in order to get to reality. So Sir Isaac Newton more or less thought that we lived in a universe of absolute space in which, objects moved around in absolute space and in which time flowed at one speed. And Einstein discovered that was wrong. Space and time were one thing. So he broke through the appearance to get to the truth of things. So I'm in agreement with quantum mechanics on getting through the appearance to the truth of things, and I'm in agreement with Ramanuja on getting through the appearance to the truth of things, but I deny that anything is an illusion or not real.
Thank you.
That
Thank
makes
you.
sense?
Thank you.
Any other question?
Sir, my question is, I am Krishna Kumar.
Yes, sir.
My question is, Saranagati helps in no birth, rebirth, since it finishes our karmas, making it zero. But Christianity believes final day of judgment only. There is some contradiction. Can you please throw some light on that?
Sorry, I'm having a hard time understanding the question. Can somebody repeat it to me? Just repeat the question to me.
Saranagati helps in finishing all our karmas and attaining God. Is it clear? Saranagati.
Oh, okay, I got you. Sorry, Saranagati. Okay, so we're kind of going from Ramanuja to Vedanta Deshika here a little bit, with the doctrine of, we're talking about the doctrine of Prapatti and its relationship to.
Yeah.
Okay, absolutely. So I think that there are many aspects to a self, right? Ramanuja acknowledged these. We have an emotional self, just to make it simple with regard to your question. We have an emotional self and an intellectual self. And our emotional self needs to give ourselves over to God. But sometimes our intellectual self can stop that. Our intellectual self can say something like, well, what proof do I have that God exists? Or our intellectual self can say something like, well, how is that going to affect my status in my community if I do that, etc., if I give myself over to God? And so Prapatti can be obstructed by the intellect. Therefore, we need to have the intellectual self and the emotional self working together in tandem. And so I consider Ramanuja's work on his ontology to be very valuable, because it primes us to be intellectually more willing to practice Prapatti. So my answer to you is, once again, a both and, not an either or answer. I believe that we should have both Ramanuja's theology and ontology and the Prapatti as advocated by Ramanuja in his later works, as well as by Vedanta Deshika, for example.
Okay, sub question, sir. That is the Prabhati, we say in Sri Vaishnavism, but Christianity believes in final day of judgment. That is whatever judgment given by God. So that seems to be some contradictory. Please throw some light on that.
Well, not all Christians believe in the final judgment in the same way. I mean, there are some Christians who believe that Jesus is coming concretely to earth next week, and they have been believing this for a long time. I don't interpret Jesus' teachings that way. I interpret the judgment, or I'll put it this way. I interpret the end times as an ongoing, ceaseless beginning time. In other words, in this moment right now, we have an opportunity to create a new beginning. Every single one of us, as individuals and as a world, we have an opportunity to create a brand new beginning. And that's given to us. That opportunity is given to us by God. And in order to grasp that opportunity, that beginning, we need to give ourselves over to God. And that's why Jesus preached the kingdom of God incessantly. He was preaching not an end, but he was preaching a brand new beginning. And the brand new beginning that he was preaching was deeply tied into prapati, or giving yourself over to God. So once again, that judgment, I don't see it as a harsh, condemning judgment going to heaven or hell. I see it as a intense recognition of how important our conduct is to God, because we are all God, and that we always have the opportunity to begin anew in every moment, to end our suffering, especially the suffering we cause each other, and to begin a commonwealth of mutual care and concern.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions, sirs? Anybody? Okay, now I request Mr. Rangaraja and Madanagopal to propose the vote of thanks.
Thank you, sir. So the question is, why do I consider Ramanuja as my Acharya? I mean, to me, and perhaps I can speak for almost every other person in this call, there's not even a question, because my father did that, my grandfather and great-grandfathers and sevens of generations believed in Ramanuja. So as a head of theology, head of the religion, I don't have any problems in terms of believing that he is my Acharya. But obviously the questions change when you move from a religion to a philosophy or theology. There could be options, there could be questions, there could be a lot more questions than answers. And I think, so this is a very interesting dialogue, particularly, I mean, the dilemma that we had we didn't have this dilemma in terms of considering Ramanuja or Acharya, and it's heartening to know that somebody who's actually had a chance to look at many options, many philosophies, is saying that Ramanuja is an Acharya who can be very universal and contributing to a much larger inclusive universe. So thank you very much for that. I think that's very, very heartening. It's very different from everything else that we've been listening to. So obviously Ramanuja is very difficult to contain in one lecture or in one thought even. I mean, he could handle very, very huge spectrum of being a very complex philosopher who could decode the Upanishads, and at the same time he can be in an absolutely religious, ritualistic mode and treat the God as his child and care as though he is the mother. Okay, so he can wear multiple hats and span the entire spectrum. Okay, the greatness, as you pointed out, is this universal appeal, the inclusiveness, the non-rejection of anything which is real or any good part of the philosophy. So it is in a sense that in a world, and I think your works on the comparative religious philosophies are an attempt towards reconciliation and finding commonality rather than fighting over it. So I think he can be a great asset. So thank you very much for pointing that out. Obviously, a lecture of this nature is just nothing but an opening of a thought or an agenda, not even an agenda. This can be discussed very hugely. Even in this call, there are professors and teachers who have learned and who taught Vaishnavism, Ramanuja's philosophies, which probably, if I can do a rough calculation, is about hundreds of years. Okay, so it'll be a great opportunity if you are able to sometime in your schedule make a trip to the land of Ramanuja, and we'll be happy to host a much larger, wider discussion with you on Ramanuja's philosophies and contributions and so on and so forth. Anyway, thank you very much for spending your valuable time in addressing us, and equally thanks to all our professors and others who kind of spent time this evening, and also the people who will later on view this in the YouTube and other channels of our Vaishnavism alumni group. So thank you very much for that. Really appreciate the thing. And we thank the Department of Vaishnavism, the University of Madras, which is very driving force behind the spread of Vaishnavism. The challenge that sometimes we have is the universality or the inclusiveness of Ramanuja is not so much visible in some of us. So we kind of tend to bottle and keep Ramanuja much inside than taking in Ramanuja's and his philosophy to outside world. So
I'm letting Ramanuja out of the bottle. So I'm trying very hard to let Ramanuja out of the bottle and get him to influence Christian theology. So I thank you for the invitation. I'd love to come to Madras sometime and meet y'all in person. I much prefer interpersonal contact than technological contact. I think that's because it's a little bit harder to discern the presence of God within people through a screen than it is in person. But as far as Ramanuja being my Acharya, I was actually in Hampi in Karnataka, and there was a temple to Ramanuja there. And the temple had been abandoned, and it was just being used for storage by the Architectural Society of India. And I didn't realize how emotional my attachment was, but I was a little bit hurt and offended that Ramanuja's temple was in disuse, and I kind of had an urge to rehabilitate the temple. So my attraction to Ramanuja is not just intellectual. At this point, it's also an emotional attachment.
Great, sir. Thank you so much, and we really appreciate that. So we look forward to such interactions. We just hope that this is just a beginning of our long association in uncovering the philosophy of Ramanuja.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So thank you very much, Mr. John. So as Mr. Rangarajan said, you are always welcome to Madras. And Ramanuja's birthplace is hardly 25-30 kilometers from here. You please visit us. Okay. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. And
thank you, Anandal. Officially, we end this session. Thank you, Anandal. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.